console application type is often overlooked, but it can be one of the most powerful project types in C#. In fact, if you're learning C# and you're just starting out, this should be your first project type that you learn, and it should be the one you stick with for your first 50 or so practice projects. In this video, we're going to look at what the console project type is, how to get started with it, and then why you would use this project type even as a senior developer in C#. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. I do this by providing videos here on YouTube multiple times per week. Plus, I have a weekly podcast. I also provide courses on C#, web development, and much more at IamTimCorey.com. The profits from those sales are what pays for the free content here on YouTube, so that everyone can have a great education in C#, not just those who can afford it. Now, in this video, as with most of my videos, I'm going to create some source code. If you'd like a copy of the source code, use the link in the description. Okay, let's go over to Visual Studio. I have Visual Studio 2022 Community Edition open. We're going to create a new project. And in here, we're going to look for the console app. So I already have it here, but you can also search for it. Let's choose console here. There we go, console app. Notice there's also a console app.NET framework. That's the old version. That's not what we're going to use today. Although, just so you know, the differences between the .NET framework version and the .NET Core or .NET version that we're going to use today, the difference between those two are really small. So the upgrade process is super easy. So if you have a .NET framework console app, I would recommend looking into upgrading to .NET 6 because that's the latest version of .NET and it will run much faster because the underlying structure of .NET now is much, much faster than .NET framework was. Let's hit next. We're going to call this console demo. And we'll call this console demo app. And we're going to hit next, .NET 6 LTS or long-term support, and hit create. Don't check the box that says do not use top-level statements. We want top-level statements, and hit create. Once this is done, we'll have the initial starter template for our console application. Let's just hit run to see what happens. So when we run, we get this window right here. And this window, it says hello world. If you notice the code on line 2 says console.writeline hello world. So we wrote to the console. It's this black window right here. Yours may be a different color. I've colored mine to be black with a green text. And this says hello world, which prints out hello world. And it says console write line, which means it actually moves the cursor down to the next row. But then there's no more code. So it actually closes the application. But because we're in debug mode in Visual Studio, what happens is we get this message. To automatically close the console when debugging stops, enable it in Tools, Options, Debugging, automatically close the console when debugging stops. And it says press any key to close this window. So you just have to hit enter or any other key and it will close the window. But just so you know, if you ran the executable file, not in Visual Studio, but the actual console demo.exe file that this just created, then it would flash on the screen briefly and go away because there is nothing stopping the application from closing. But you'll notice that there isn't a lot of code here. In fact, there's one code comment. We can get rid of that. And there's one line of code, console.writeline hello world. And this is because of the new top-level statements. If we didn't use the top-level statements, we would see the namespace, which would be console demo. We would see the static class main or static void main. That would be our method. And inside there, we'd see console writeline. We see a bunch of extra stuff that we really don't need to see because it's all boilerplate. And there's not a reason to see just boilerplate code. So that's why we have now top-level statements in .NET 6. That's why it's a little bit different versus a .NET 5 and before console application. But otherwise, the actual code, it's the same. So we've got a few different options right out of the gate that I want to kind of share. And this is going to be really simple stuff if you have been using console for a while, but bear with me until you get to, the reasons to use console and so on. But let's get get the simple stuff out of the way. First of all, that window, the console window, that black, in my case, black window, this is what we work with. This is our entire user interface. And yes, the console application type is a user interface project type. User interfaces for desktop applications have .exe at the end for Windows. But it interacts with the user. Now, it's not pretty. It doesn't have a nice graphical user interface, a GUI, but it is a user interface, and it's just not graphical. So this right here, this console, really holds a lot of stuff that we can do with our console, with that black window. So one of the things you see right here is you see the write. So I'm sorry, write line. So we're writing a line of text. We write hello world, and then there's a carriage return or a hit the enter key if you want to think of it that way at the end of this. There's also console write. And the difference here is, let's do that. The difference here is that this one is going to write on its own line, but not have that carriage return or the enter key, whatever you want to think of it as, at the end of it. Which means that if I wrote another one, because it's not going to show up really, like if we were as now, you probably wouldn't be able to tell. So there's no carriage return after hello again. But what if we change the order here? Let's do that. So now we have hello again first, and then hello world. And notice it says hello again, hello world. And they're kind of smushed together right here. And there is that blank line again. That's because hello again is a console write. It wrote the text out, but then the cursor stops right at the end of again, and then it goes to the next line of code, and that's where you get write line. It's different because it puts that carriage return to take it to the next line afterwards. So typically we use the console write write line because we get that carriage return. But there's sometimes when we use the console write. So for example, let's comment this one out. Imagine if you wanted to get a person's name. So let's start with console.write. What is your first name? Put a colon, we'll put a space. And then we're going to deal with the third pretty popular thing to do with console, and that is read line. So let's do string first name equals console.readline. And what console.readline does is, oh, by the way, we made this string nullable. There we go. What this does is it reads whatever the user types, and it stops reading or stops remembering when you hit the enter key. So read line means whatever you type out, it's going to remember that. And then once you hit the enter key, that's what's going to say, okay, you're done. Now take that value and put it into first name. So that's going to capture our first name. Let's do a console write line and say string interpolation. Your first name is first name. Like so. And now we have a little working application. Notice there's that text down below isn't there because we have not completed our application. So hello world, notice on the next line down, it was your first name, but notice the white cursor is blinking on the same line, which makes a lot more sense in a user interface where we have the input next to what it's requesting. So I'm going to say Tim, we hit enter, and it says your first name is Tim on the next line because we hit the enter key, which moved the cursor down to the next line. And then we did a write line, which wrote out this and put the carriage return at the end. And then the application is done, so it closes out like so. Now, there is one other tweak that we often do. I like to put read line at the very end without doing anything with it. I'm not capturing any data here. It's not capturing first name, but what that does is it allows me to run the application without being in Visual Studio, without it closing on me. So if I were to type Tim, hit enter, it says your first name is Tim, and the cursor just kind of stays at that next line, waiting for me to hit enter. The benefit there, let's go to Open Folder in File Explorer and find where that opened up. We'll go to bin, debug, net6, and there's our console demo.exe. We'll hit enter, and here's our console app. What's your first name? Tim. Your first name is Tim. Now notice the cursor is blinking there. I hit enter, and it goes away. It closes out. If I didn't have this read line at the end, this is what I'd get. I ran out. I shouldn't run it. I'm going to run it from this exe right here. There we go. First name is Tim. Did you see it? It technically printed out your first name as Tim, but because the application was done, it closed out the console. That's what happens when you're not in Visual Studio. So this read line right here allows us, let's go ahead and build a solution, allows us to see the results. So Tim, your first name is Tim, and it's waiting for more input, which the input is what closes out the application. Now, that's the very basics of a console application. It can do all the same things with data access and all the rest. It can use class libraries. It can use dependency injection. There's a lot of stuff you can do with a console application. But let's talk about why you would need to know what a console application is or when you'd ever use one of these things. It seems like it's so archaic. It's so old that console seems like a forgotten context or forgotten thing from, the 1970s. Well, yes, I grew up in the 80s, not the 70s. I grew up in the 80s with a computer that's all it had was that console type environment. It's actually just the command prompt was there, and I could do different things with that only. Well, that doesn't mean that the console is no longer valid or valuable. In fact, the console is incredibly valuable. So let's talk about why. Well, first of all, I said in the intro that if you're learning C# for the first time, you should learn this project type first, and you should probably build your first 50 plus projects in the console app before you move on to anything else. And the reason why is because you get to test out C# code very, very easily. So we've got a little bit of code here that reads and writes. You have all the structure you need to now use the user interface. Write line, write, read line. You got it all. Now you can learn variables, how to work with variables, if statements and if else, and do loops and while loops and for each, and lists and dictionary and all the rest of those cool stuff. You can start learning C# all the way up through object-oriented programming all in the console. In fact, in my C# master course, which is designed to take you from knowing nothing to being able to be at least a C# junior developer, if not a mid-level developer. It depends on how much you practice. But it's designed to take you from knowing nothing to knowing how to be a functioning real-world C# developer in a real job. Well, in the first quite a few sections, we just use the console app. We use it for learning how to debug, learning the basics of C# like variables and ifs and for and all the rest. We learn about object-oriented programming in the console because this console is super simple. You don't have to fiddle with things. If you decide you want to create a new console app and start doing work, you're doing work almost immediately. And the only things you have to really worry about are console write line, read line, and maybe write. Those are the three commands that really are your bread and butter for interacting with the user interface. Everything else is your code focused on what you're learning and testing. That means you can practice things quicker. You're not distracted by all the things going on in the other project types. You're not distracted by making it look pretty or fixing the layout or tweaking things. You're just focused on the C# code. And the more you focus on the C# code, the faster you will learn. My goal is to help people learn C# the easy way. This is the easy way. Focus on the code you're learning, practice it over and over again with quick practice projects like this. They don't have to do anything important or valuable. They just have to show that you know how to use an if statement or a for each statement. So focus on using this for training. I do this all the time. I don't know how many console applications on my computer that I reuse, and I still have dozens because I want to learn something new. I learn it, I practice it in the console unless it's a UI specific thing. And believe it or not, most things in C# aren't UI specific. They're focused on the actual C# code. So I have a bunch of practice console applications just to test things out. Now, that's the first reason to use console applications, is because it's excellent for learning C#. Now, next up, if you want a quick application, if you want something quick to do something, this is the quickest thing you can get. Like I said, we got started, we had one line of code, and we really could have gotten rid of that. And so you can write your code very, very quickly and get a proof of concept going, or get a quick little application that does one thing for you. Whether it's maybe you have a need to have a little translator, a little database lookup, or something like that. You can do that in a console application, and it's super quick to do, and it's super useful, and it doesn't get in the way of your other applications or what's going on your computer. It just runs, gives you information, and you're done. So quick applications are the next kind of benefit of a console application. But this next one is kind of the most massive thing out there. In fact, this sets console app apart as the most important project type in C#, and that is automation. You really can't, it's very, very difficult to automate a web application or to automate a desktop application. Those are designed to be interfaced from a user perspective. A user is designed to work with those applications. It's designed for them to click on things with a mouse or tab through things with a keyboard, to enter information from a keyboard. They're designed to be working with users. Automation, on the other hand, is designed to not have to need a user to be involved. This is what powers the world. So for instance, when you see any kind of DevOps process, the process where your application gets built and deployed to some type of server, and usually those are automated, continuous integration, continuous deployment. Guess what? That's all automation through console applications. In fact, if you notice when you do the build process in Visual Studio, guess what this is? It's really a console application. Visual Studio, when you do a build process, is basically running an automation script. Now, it's not exactly a console application because you are pushing buttons, but behind the scenes, what's happening is Visual Studio is using some command line stuff. In fact, if you were to go to your command line, let's open up the terminal here and look at .NET, and we can do .NET-H for help. There's a bunch of stuff here. So for instance, we can do add, build, clean, format, pack, publish, remove, restore. These are all .NET commands. So I can say .NET add and add a file to my solution. I can test something. I can build a new solution. I can run an application. I can publish an application. I can create NuGet commands off of here. There's so many things I can do, because everything you can do in Visual Studio, or practically everything, can also be done through the command line, because of the fact that that's where the automation can come in. You can automate creating a project, adding things to a project, building a project, restoring NuGet packages to a project. The list goes on of the things you can do in an automated format. I was a Windows Server administrator. I actually worked as a IT director for a college for a while, about 7 years. And during that time, I was basically in charge of everything. And part of it was the servers. And we had older servers. We switched over to, at the time, I believe it was Windows Server 2003, and kind of moved up from there. But one of the big things that came out around that time frame, I'm not sure when exactly it was, but was Windows PowerShell. And PowerShell, its goal was to be the automation engine behind everything. And Microsoft made this big push where they said all of our servers will be PowerShell first. And so all the things like if you had an Active Directory, Exchange, or the list went on, you could interact with it using PowerShell, which was a version of the console. It was a way to work with your systems in an automated manner. And that has continued to this day, where now if you want to create Azure resources, you can get the Azure console application or console tools so you can call up Azure from your console and start creating new resources, deploying resources, building resources, expanding your resources out, scaling out. There's so many things you can do. In fact, you can do everything through that Azure shell. And in fact, there are times when there's more things you can do with the Azure shell than there is with the user interface. So that GUI, the graphical user interface, is more limited than the Azure shell is. So there's a lot you can do with automation. I would encourage when you're thinking about, hey, I need to automate something, look at the console first. It's probably your best bet. If you have something like a WinForm or WPF application or something like that, well, that's a little harder for automation because you have to have it running in someone's profile. In fact, if you look at the services, so if you want to install a Windows service, it's really a console application. It just has a little bit of decoration around it. And in fact, you can take a console application and make it a service. Now, you can't have things like readline in it because there's no interactivity with it because it's running in an automated fashion, not with a user's input. So that can be a little confusing sometimes. But this console app can be a service which can install on Windows, it can install on Mac, it can install on Linux. So a console app can install on any of those systems and be a service or run interactively. So automation is a huge deal. And services. Like I said, this is a service. You can install it in Windows and have it run in the background even when you're not logged into Windows. Now, there is one bonus, and this is something that people don't realize, I don't think. This is something that's changed in later versions of .NET, but let's just add, we're not going to build anything, we're going to add a new project here, and we're going to choose a web application. Because a lot of people say, well, hey, Tim, you think the console's great? No, web's better. Web's better. And there's a lot of benefits to web, but it's not everything. But let's just choose a web application. Let's just choose, we could choose a Blazor server app, ASP.core web app, doesn't really matter. Let's just choose a Razor Pages application. We'll call it web demo. And we'll say .NET 6. We'll leave all the rest of the stuff. The defaults, we're not actually going to change anything in here. But now we have our web application. Right-click on your web application. Go to Properties. General output type specifies the type of application to build. Do you see that? Your web application type is actually a console application. That's what it is at its heart. It's not a class library, it's not a Windows application, it's a console application. So when you think, well, console applications are so limited, then what application type do you like? WinForm, WPF is pretty much your choice because your web application types are all built off the console. So that's how powerful it is that you can build a ton off of it. Now, of course, the web application type adds a lot to the console. It actually has a graphical user interface that it provides. But I do want to point out that that's kind of a bonus here, that you can do a lot with a console app because that's what Microsoft uses as the underpinnings for a lot of their things. So this is just an intro to the console application. Just like anything else, you can add classes to here, folders. You can add, like I said, other project types you can reference, like class libraries and stuff like that. Add NuGet packages, dependency injection, the works. So this is a full-featured C# application project type, but it's super quick. It's great for learning C#, for creating quick applications, for automation, for creating services that do automation, and it even powers things like web apps. I'd love for you to check out the console application. Make sure it's a tool in your toolbox. Too often I hear people say, oh, I don't need that because we have X, whatever X is, the latest graphical user interface project type. Don't throw tools out of the toolbox because you think there's something new and flashy out. There's a reason why when you work with tools, your toolbox gets bigger and bigger and more full with more and more tools, because not everything requires a hammer. Some things require a screwdriver, and even different kinds of screwdrivers. I have a whole lot of screwdrivers. Plus, I have a drill with an even more screwdriver bits, because there's different tools for different jobs. I don't use the same screwdriver on a light switch that I do on a computer motherboard. They're different screwdrivers because they have different sizes. So even just in the screwdriver space, I have a bunch of different options. But then you talk about all the different tools for the different things you do in the real world. Well, in the same way with programming, there's different project types for different situations. You need to start thinking through, I'm adding a tool to my toolbox, not which one's the best. Now, there's different ones for different situations. And I definitely recommend that you use the best one for each situation. But what is best isn't overall best, it's best for that situation. You need to evaluate that every time, which means you need to understand the different project types out there. This is why I created the C#projects.com site, because I wanted you to have an overview and say, hey, I need to create a desktop application type. Cool. Which one do you want to create? There's 6 right now from Microsoft. So which one do you think is best? Well, it depends on what your situation is. We've talked about WinForms recently. WPF is a great option. UWP, well, that's actually deprecated, but there was a time when that was valuable. There's .NET MAUI, Blazor Hybrid, and console applications. And you know what? I would not choose Blazor Hybrid or MAUI for every desktop project type. It just does not make sense. So choose the one that is right for the given project type. Okay? So if you have a question about which one I choose, select each one, read the simple description, get the intro video to understand better what that project type is. There's also the overview videos, which of course I'm going to be redoing some of those and adding more to. Notice also that some project types kind of span more than one category. For example, console is also in the service category because it can function without user input, those automation things. And so it can do service type work as well as be a desktop user interface. So what you choose needs to be best for your given project and your given scenario, not just industry best, because what is best is going to change depending on your scenario. Okay, so that is a console project type. I would love to hear your thoughts on the console, how you use it, what benefits you found from it, maybe that I didn't mention. And also, if you have other suggestions for other videos you want to see, of course, we're going to be filling in more of the content here. There's a lot already filled in, but we're going to be adding more soon. But if you have other suggestions, go to suggestions.imtimcorey.com and look for the suggestion that fits you. Notice there's a lot of suggestions. In fact, as of today, there's 310, and that's actually going to clean stuff out. We had a whole bunch of completed suggestions. Suggestions where people make a suggestion. I said, yep, great idea. I created a video for it, and then I completed it. And I usually leave those completed ones up for a while because I do put in there, hey, here's the URL for the completed information. But there's a lot more to go. We've got a lot of stuff in here that maybe already exists. And so if you find something that you say, hey, I want to learn more about .NET microservices, go ahead and upvote that. But if you don't find a suggestion here, go ahead and leave a new suggestion. Make sure you're descriptive in both the title and the description so that people will actually see and understand it to upvote it. If it's not clear, often it sits in the bio and doesn't get any votes, which unfortunately might mean that your suggestion doesn't end up in a video just because I don't see it, or I don't see that there's enough interest in creating that video. Obviously, there's some things that are very interesting to people. The third-party authentication in .NET 6, I wasn't going to do that. Guess what? I probably will do that because we have 156 upvotes of people saying, yes, I want that too. So definitely come here and leave your vote. Let me know what you want to see, and hopefully you'll see your suggestion coming up soon in upcoming training video on I Am Tim Corey, or as a course or a dev question video on the podcast as well. All right, thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.